su Sisley je psihijatrija, Roberto Pickering je pa pacijent, ki se zdravi s konopljo zaradi PTSD-ja. To je čas, ko se naloži. Aha. Okay, you can start now.
Okay, perfect.
Sir, are you there?
Here. Yeah, hey, Roberto, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. All right, we're on with the group. Let me just see. I had my slides here, and then they just disappeared. Let's see what happened. 1 second, you guys. Let's see where that talk went.
Yeah, that's it.
Strange. Let's see what happened. Go. Okay, hang on. Let me take a second here. While it's loading, I'll just start my intro and then we can jump into the meat of this. I'm really honored to be with you guys, and we thank you so much for hanging in there with us through the technical challenges. My name is Sue Sisley. I'm a physician from Arizona. I'm the principal investigator on a FDA-approved clinical trial looking at cannabis, at different strains of whole plant cannabis for military veterans that have PTSD. And I also, we're studying other topics as well. We're looking at cannabis as a possible substitution for opioids. But the trial that I'm doing currently is the one looking at cannabis for veterans. And basically, I'm a primary care physician. I'm boarded in internal medicine and psychiatry. But I also conduct this clinical trial as sort of as my real passion, you know. And let me just see if this slide looks like it's coming up here. Let me see if we can get through this. So what I'm going to talk with you guys about today is a little bit more about why we got interested in the idea of cannabis for PTSD. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of the scientific literature that had already suggests that cannabis might be useful for PTSD, so that you can see that there really is science that already published science that supports this. Let me go back here. Okay, so this is, let me go back. So this is, as I said, this is our clinical trial, where these are the different partners. We're looking at 76 military veterans that have treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are veterans who've already failed medication or therapy, and they're now looking to try cannabis as a treatment. This is, as I said, I'm from Arizona. I do primary care. Just so you know, I don't use cannabis personally, and I'm not part of the industry. I'm just interested in the science. And I did work at the Veterans Hospital for many years, but ultimately I ended up as a faculty member at the University of Arizona, where we were eventually fired. We were terminated from the university because they didn't like the optics of this research. You know what I mean? They didn't like the idea of having veterans smoking pot on campus, smoking, you know, marijuana at the university, and they thought it would harm their federal funding. So ultimately, when we were tossed out, we were lucky to have a lot of good physicians that came forward to try to defend this work. And they really, there were many people who viewed this as an attack on scientific freedom. But the good news is we ended up with tons of free media coverage, you know, the study. And what happened was people became aware about the barriers to cannabis research. So that's why if the government there is questioning that there's not enough studies, there's a reason why the government has systematically blocked this work for many decades. But luckily, we ended up with our own institute. So now we're happily independent. We're doing the work at a private institute in Arizona where we don't work with any universities or hospitals. But after being terminated from the university, we ended up with this $2 million grant. And the money from the state of Colorado also went to fund cannabis research in all of these different areas. So I wanted to give you some hope that in the next few years, the state of Colorado is funding research in all of these different areas. So you're gonna, in the next 3 years, you're gonna have published data about cannabis for Parkinson's disease, cannabis for pediatric brain tumors. All this stuff is being studied right now by my colleagues. The reason we've been fighting so hard for this study is because it's the first and only randomized controlled trial in the world looking at cannabis for PTSD. This is a DEA Schedule I license. So many of you are wondering, you know, how do I get to this? Is basically the DEA has given me a researcher license to purchase cannabis. So this is what scientists call this the golden ticket. It allows me the privilege of purchasing cannabis from the federal government. But this is what it looks like. So you would think we ordered 8 kilograms of cannabis from the US government. And you would think that it would come like in some kind of armored truck or no, it just arrived by FedEx. The guy had no idea he was transporting marijuana. He was completely stunned. But this is what it looks like, right? It comes to the scientists frozen in these sandwich bags, basically. These are little Ziploc bags. It's frozen. We pour it out. It's basically like a green powder. I mean, I'm sure, you know, from what your impressions or what cannabis should look like, most people look at that and don't even believe it's cannabis. But this is how they standardize the cannabis. They take different strains and they blend them into this powder. And this is what we're forced to work with. So this is the only federally legal supply of marijuana for any of these controlled trials. So I just wanted to show that to you because I want you to see the way that the government is, you know, potentially sabotaging this work, you know, because we're forced to use this and this only, if you're trying to study the effectiveness of cannabis and you're forced to start with this material, you know, a lot of people would argue that this purpose group studied from the beginning. I did want to point out, you know, one thing is, you know, cannabis has been in the U.S. pharmacopoeia since the 1800s. So, and one thing that was interesting about when we were studying this, I realized that even back then, even as far back as the 1800s, the medical community recognized that cannabis could be effective in all of these areas. And you can see, I particularly want you to pay. I especially wanted to point out the idea of cannabis for opioid addiction, right? So that's something that we're currently designing a clinical trial to study cannabis as a substitution for pain pills, for heroin. It also mentions alcoholism, that it could be a substitution therapy for alcoholics. And that's something Roberto is gonna talk with you about that a little bit more. But I'm just gonna tell you about how we ended up here. The reason I got interested in cannabis for PTSD is because of the veterans in my practice. I've been taking care of vets for 20 years, and they claimed that they were getting benefit from marijuana in all these different areas, right? That it was helping their sleep, helping their nightmares, helping their anxiety. So we started to, you know, see this epidemic of veteran suicide in the U.S. We lose 22, well, the data changes year to year, but it's about 20 to 22 veterans each day kill themselves in the U.S. And we think that that's related to undertreated post-traumatic stress disorder. That's actually a picture of Roberto there at the top. That's him in, you know, when he was in his military service. But this data is incredibly depressing, you know, that we lose that many veterans to suicide. We don't have any good treatments for PTSD. And so I think that, you know, I I wonder if cannabis could help curb this epidemic of veteran suicide, which really should be considered a public health crisis, but it's not. The government isn't really doing anything about this. And these are the only two FDA-approved medications that we have for PTSD. We just have Zoloft and Paxil. And so when those fail, you know, the media is starting to realize that these medications are really not much better than placebo, you know? So when those medications fail, we move to all these other meds. Look at all this whole pile. This is a mountain of psychiatric medication. All of these are allowed to be used off-label to treat PTSD. You can see all the sleep meds, all of the medications for bipolar disorder, you know, all the seizure meds, all of these other meds from different classes. You know, so you can see why the veterans, all these antipsychotics, all of these meds have so many terrible side effects. They're brutal, and that's why these veterans start feeling like guinea pigs, you know? So that's how we got into this. You know, the U.S. has become the prescription overdose capital of the world now. We lose a person to prescription drug overdose every 19 minutes. Somebody dies from this. So in the veteran community, among our military veterans, they have a 33% higher rate of prescription drug overdose, partly because we give them so many pills to use. We did have this JAMA article. Many of you guys have seen this article from 2014, where they managed to, they evaluated all the 23 medical marijuana states in the US, and they found that on average, there was a 25% reduction in opioid overdose deaths in those states that had legal cannabis available to them. So what we're seeing is that in states where medical marijuana is legally available, the patients are choosing that as a safer alternative to all the opioids and other things that can kill them. The other thing that's compelling is that there's two, you know, governments, both Israel and Canada, cover the cost of their veterans' cannabis as any other medicine. And I think that's the right approach. You know, this medicine, this is the group, I'll show you the group in Canada. This is a charity called Marijuana for Trauma, and all these Canadian veterans are teaching each other how to use cannabis because they know they're not going to get that good information from the physician. So they're basically, you know, teaching each other, coaching each other on how to use this plant. And this is, you know, a picture that one of my veterans, you know, it's a really good illustration. He described his experience with cannabis, that he was drowning in pills and pill bottles, and finally discovered this roll, you know, in this case, a joint that he found life-saving. And that's the words that so many of these veterans use. They describe cannabis as saving their life. And I think we really owe it to them to study this plant in a rigorous way. Now, I'm just gonna show you real quickly, I'm just gonna take 1 minute to show you an example of some of the research already available about cannabis as a medicine. You can see here, this is a commonly used comparison where they talk about the ginormous amount of scientific articles about cannabis compared to all these other drugs that are already on the market. But let me just give you a glimpse of some of the articles on cannabis for PTSD. This is the Journal of Neuroscience, 2009. This is, in 2009, they already had legitimate data about cannabis helping to suppress negative memories, you know, and help reduce the anxiety. So that you see all these, even back in 2002, Nature was talking about how endocannabinoids seem to play a role in suppressing memories. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, this might be slowing down here. Uh-oh. I might have lost the picture here. But anyway, I was going to show you, it might take a second to pull up, but I wanted to show you one of the most important articles in this list is from last year. One of our colleagues followed 80 veterans through the New Mexico medical cannabis program. So in New Mexico, they have it's legal for patients to access marijuana, and 80 veterans were studied over the course of a year. And what they found was they monitored the severity of their post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSD, and they found a 75% reduction in PTSD symptoms using just cannabis alone. So this was data that was published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, and it really proved to us that we are on the right track with this. I'm not sure why it's not coming up, but I think what I'd like to do now is toss it over to Roberto. Let me, 1 second here. Let me put Roberto on here. I'm just gonna pull up his slides real quick. Let's see here. iCloud Drive. Okay. 1 second, and then we'll, this is a perfect time to let him jump in and talk about his own experience. So you're gonna hear now from a vet who's been dealing with this firsthand. All right, Roberto, you still on with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, ladies and
wonderful.
gentlemen.
That's Roberto. I'm gonna just put it on his first slide, and then, all right, Roberto, you go ahead and talk, and I'll move the slides for you.
Thank you for having us on, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about our, American technical difficulties on this end, but anyway, my name is Roberto Pickering. I'm a 100% disabled Marine Corps combat veteran. I'm currently the co-founder of the Battlefield Foundation, which is a suicide prevention campaign and non-opiate based relief through cannabis therapies, focusing on raising money for clinical trials in this space. I'm also a partner at Brightside Holdings, which is essentially an all-services management company for the cannabis industry, focusing on cultivation, product development of cannabis into strain-specific medication for the masses. Sue, can you go to the next one, please?
Yeah, you bet.
So a little of my personal story here. I served in the Iraqi war as a sniper in 2003 to 2004. When I came back from war, I was in a really bad place in my head. I almost took my life a couple of years after the war there. I was self-medicating very heavily with alcohol and developed alcoholism. And I didn't know what PTSD was. I was fortunate enough to have a good family and friends and support system that were able to get me into a program at the VA in Palo Alto, of which I completed a 90-day inpatient program and was diagnosed 100% disabled for PTSD. While at the VA, I was prescribed 13 different medications to manage my various symptoms, insomnia, anxiety, and such and so forth. Needless to say, this made my life exponentially worse and them trying to help me. And I hadn't stopped drinking at that point either. So having 13 different medications in your body coupled with alcohol, it might sound crazy that seemed normal to me at that time in my life, but you veterans are very, orders oriented, if you will, and we listen to our physicians. And the physicians at the VA, in my opinion, very much overprescribe medication and don't take in the fact that we don't know how that many medications can affect in your body, and especially when coupled with alcohol. A lot of these medications, psych meds, having the symptoms listed as suicide being one of the most detrimental symptoms. So pretty awful when you're trying to come out of a depressive state and the medications you're taking list suicide as a potential harmful side effect. Some dark humor there. But with the help of marijuana, I was exposed to it through a friend of mine's father, who was a black market grower at that time, 12 years ago in California, and suggested that I use it and try to come off of these meds. And I realized that, and I'd known this from earlier in my life, but when I smoked marijuana, I never had the urge to drink alcohol. So in my trying to quit drinking, I started to use marijuana, and I was very successful in being able to stop drinking alcohol to this day. And I attribute that to cannabis. I was also able to get a full night's sleep, and lo and behold, I was then over the next few years able to come off of all of those 13 different medications. And today I don't drink, and I am not on any prescription pills. So I'm very passionate about this plant. So Sue, maybe the next slide. So a little of what I feel like we need to focus on, as this is very much a political movement, as it is a medical movement, and a systematic problem at that. So the Battlefield Foundation, our focus, Sue and I came together. She's my best friend, and we've come together as kind of doctor and patient duo here. And we're now advocating for efficacy clinical trials in the cannabis space to lend this medicine real credibility, and focusing on myself being an entrepreneur in the cannabis space for the last decade. I've been focusing on getting these businesses to responsibly give back and provide funding for these much needed clinical trials. There's also a huge opportunity for creating various employment opportunities for veterans within the cannabis industry. I myself, being an example of that, through the wreckage of my past and essentially being the basket case that I was early on coming back from war, Google wasn't hiring, if you will. I didn't have a stellar resume. So I needed a place to find gainful employment, provide a life for myself. And I really found a lot of comfort in that. PTSD being a form or being a condition of isolation, I found a lot of comfort in making a living for myself in grow rooms and watching the fruits of your labor, provide a living for yourself. And I've been able to successfully pass that model down to other veterans. I'll leave you with this. I think there's just as much medication in being able to bring home a meaningful check for your family and get off of the VA's prescription pills, as opposed to the former years of my life where I was sitting on the couch on disability pay and eating those pills. So it's a whole reintegration process, and I think the cannabis industry as a whole leans itself to that, as we've all struggled and continue to struggle. And thank you all for your efforts getting to this point. So thank you for letting me share my story. And if there's any questions you guys may have, please ask me anything. Thank you very much.
That was great, Roberto. Yeah, bud. Good job, man. I think, you can see why this is a very unlikely friendship, but he is my best buddy. Roberto and I travel around the world talking about this issue because we think it's so important that people hear about his experience and hear about the work that we're doing. This study is currently enrolling veterans. We have about 50 more veterans to go before we can finalize the study and publish the data. So we're about probably 2 years away from having published data on this issue, but I really look forward to sharing that with you. This is a triple blind study, just so you know. Everyone is blinded in the study, so it's a very rigorous trial, and it'll give us some really good objective data on how cannabis is working, even though, granted that we are forced to use this sort of substandard marijuana, nothing close to what Bojo has access to, but it's still something. It's a start, and we're looking forward to bringing that to you eventually. I don't know, Bojo, do you think we can take a question, or is it too hard to do that?
Yes, you can pick up some questions, but mostly questions we will do tomorrow on the workshops, okay? But now you can also answer some questions, of course.
Sounds good.
Hi there, Sisley. It's Dr. Bob here. I just want to, it's very important, I think, that you and I and Roberto get in touch. I'm involved in a project in Colorado where we've acquired a unique piece of land that has unique zoning, and we're able to build housing on it for veterans where we expect the VA will fund the entire house. And by the way we've constructed the whole thing, and by virtue of unique zoning, we're going to have cannabis farms that are going to be allocated to each of the veterans who will buy the house paid for by the government, and in turn each one of them will make at least $100,000 a year off the community cannabis that we're going to be doing by virtue of the mechanism we've put in place. So it would be great to get together with you on this situation.
I love that idea. Bob, that sounds terrific. We will definitely connect after this and talk about the possibilities. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Bob. That's absolutely wonderful.
Well, we want people like you to be there. We want people like you to be a member of that community where you teach them to grow, where everybody's helping one another, and we move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I very much look forward to following up with you on that conversation. Thank you again for your work.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see everybody tomorrow then, I guess.
Yes, but it will be a little bit earlier than today, okay? I will let you know on email.
You got it. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate everybody.
Okay, thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you guys so much for your efforts. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.